English, the great language that the human world unites over. Spoken by 1.2 billion people around the globe, 67% of whom speak it as their second language. 1,500 years ago, no one could ever have thought that this small twig, brought by the Anglos and Saxons from the West Germanic language branch, would one day bloom into a great tree with roots all over the world, toppling the throne of even the once most enduring neutral language of all, Latin, which has served our academic and literary needs for thousands of years since the time of the Roman Empire. This is only probable for most of us to assume that English must be a perfect language. After all, everyone is using it, wherever you are, whatever you do. As long as you can speak and understand English, you are going to be fine. But that cannot be further from the truth. English is nowhere near being a perfect language. There are so many things wrong with it. For example, its spelling system is a mess. Is sometimes a, like in paste, instead of as in Albert or ask. K is sometimes like in sell, not k as in cowboy or correct. Is sometimes like in we, not as in Edward, met, or get. If that does not already sound ridiculous, there is a plethora of irregularities and exceptions in its lexical and grammatical aspects as well. So, how did such a flawed language become the king of all tongues? Or, a better question is, how did a language become so flawed in the first place? It is a story of sins, of human nature, much like the seven deadly sins in Catholic teaching. Let us start from the beginning, where it all began, with greed. The Romans invaded Britain in the 1st century AD and brought their alphabet. In the 7th century, the Anglos and Saxons took over, along with their language. Starting in the 9th century, Vikings occupied parts of Britannia and brought some words, including they, which replaced the Old English, he. Then the Norman French conquered in 1066 and replaced much of the vocabulary with French, including words which over time became beef, pork, invade, tongue, and person. Once the English tossed out the French, but not their words, a few centuries later, they started to acquire territories around the world like America, Australia, Africa, and India. With each new colony, Britons acquired words such as hickory, butcherer, zebra, bungalow. The British also traded and did commercial business with everyone else around the world and took words as they went, something we call borrowing, even though the words were kept. Fair to say, the English language is a museum of conquest. What does this have to do with spelling? When they borrow words, these words often come from other Latin alphabet spelling systems, but have sounds different from the sounds they make in English. Many other languages, therefore, fully adapt words they borrow. Norwegian turns chauffeur into chauffeur. Finnish turns tran into tran. In English, though, they wear their battle scars proudly. For some words, they have adopted the pronunciation but modified the spelling. For example, galoche from the word galoche in French, strange from the word estrange in French. For others, they didn't change the spelling but changed the pronunciations. Ratio, originally pronounced ratio in Latin. Sauna, the Finnish o is like owl. Ski, in Norse, is pronounced more like she. Or they kept the spelling and, to some extent, the pronunciation too, such as core, ballet, pizza, or tortilla. After greed comes sloth, or laziness, as we often say. Linguists have another term for this: economic efforts. Sounds tend to change to save effort for either the speaker or the listener. Under Scandinavian and French influence, English speakers tossed out troublesome bits of the complex Old English inflections. So a word like Hopian got whittled down to hope, and over time, the at the end stopped being pronounced. In some recent centuries, they have often kept the spelling when sounds wear down. Vado is still written as this. They simplified some sound combinations and also stopped using some altogether. The k sound, which was spelled gh, got changed to an as in laughter or just dropped as in daughter. Tongues and ears aren't the only thing being lazy, however. Scribes and typesetters can be too. If you bring over a scribe from France or typesetters from the Netherlands and Belgium, where the first presses in Britain came from, they would tend to the standard they used to. The French scribe, with their Latin influence, didn't see why the British would write quin when they obviously see that the spelling should be something like queen. The Dutch typesetters felt that ghost was missing something, so they slipped in an H to make ghost. These changes, when printed to the public, influenced the overall vocabulary. Finally, the third sin in the imperfection of the English language is pride. It started in the 11th century when French became the high-class language and loaded up the British culinary, legal, and poetic vocabularies. But the pride kicked into top gear in the Renaissance, when scholars developed a crush on the ancient classics. They started borrowing works wholesale. Many of their scientific and technical terms come from Latin and Greek, and most of the Greek terms came first through Latin, with Latin's idea of how to spell them. But they also decided that works that they already had out to display their classical heritage too. Does purple trace back to Latin populus? They did out to bear a special amulet to show its nobility. Let's add the O and make it people. Many works had letters added in by this indictable fault. Sometimes they changed their pronunciation to match the spelling as in fault, and sometimes the respellers were wrong about the etymology altogether. While isle, formerly ill, from insular, hence the S, island does not, is from Old English, England. And now they don't even want to spell things as they sound. How do spellings like head, heart, laughter, daughter, and dead look to you? Uneducated, perhaps? Annoyingly simplistic? Exactly. British enjoy their discomforts, and they really enjoy arbitrary practices that allow them to tell who are and aren't the right sort. Or because of their pride of being the superior users of this language, they have taken a useful tool and turned it into a social filter. Now that we can see that the English is a troublesome mistress, so how did she manage to win the heart of the world? For starter, a simple term: the British Empire. At its height in 1922, the British Empire was the largest in history, covering a quarter of the Earth's land area with a population of over 450 million people. The primary aim of education in the colonies became the acquisition of the English language, and the future academic and financial success of those living in colonized countries came to depend mainly on their English language ability. Prior to the Great War, French, German, and English had roughly equal significance in the world order, and Latin still had its place. German was emerging as a primary language for scientific publication, and French was acknowledged as the language of diplomacy, but Latin was a politically neutral language within Western Europe. Following the end of the Great War, the importance of German declined, and the need for Latin as a neutral language also declined. French and English were more widely used in international documents. Then, following the Second World War, the United Nations is formed, with 5 countries having veto power over the Security Council: the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Russia, and China. But realistically speaking, the French has been defeated in the war, and their overseas empire was soon to break apart. Then, since the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, Russian has become less important. So by default, England, being the country that has not been defeated in any major war or political crisis, remained the strongest candidate for an influential country in trade and relation. Let us not forget another great piece of this empire that became a powerful player in the world: the American Empire. On July 4, 1776, 13 British colonies located along the Atlantic seaboard declared independence and founded the United States of America. The US economy has since become the largest in the world, and the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 left the United States as the world's sole superpower. The global reach of America's culture, political, and economic influence has contributed significantly to bolstering the dominant position of the English language in the 20th and 21st centuries. But the most significant source of American outreach is undoubtedly Hollywood. It is the most important center of cinema. Many foreign actors through the years have learned to speak English for the simple reason that one has to speak this language to be part of the game. It is undeniable that English is the prevalent language in an industry that captures the hearts of people around the world. Aside from that, English is also the language of trade, commerce, traveling, and even the Internet of Things. The English language is now argued to belong to everyone who speaks it. Native speakers are said to have forfeited their right to exclusive ownership of English in a global context. Indeed, native speakers of English are outnumbered more than 2 to 1 by non-native speakers of this language. The fact that English now belongs to everyone or to no one would seem to imply that English will maintain its position as the global dominant language throughout the 21st century and beyond. But things have changed a lot over the century. Is there any reason to doubt that this status quo will last for a long time, even in the far future? In the 21st century, China is building itself up to challenge America for the position of the #1 economic power in the world. But whether this will translate to linguistic dominance remains to be seen. Neither political, economic, cultural, technological, nor military might alone can give one language international prominence. It takes a substantial combination of all these powers to achieve that. As a case in point, Japanese did not become a dominant language internationally, although it did increase in popularity. Despite Japan's incredible economic success from the 1960s to the 1990s, as well as the fact that it has received incredible fame and love from people around the world for its culture and its anime manga industry. It is theoretically possible that English itself will, at some future time, be succeeded by another language, promulgated by the economic, political, and cultural might of its native speakers. All we can do now is to wait and see.